All right, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon for our webinar, Talking to Communities about How Infrastructure Gets Built. Followed by the pound or hash sign. See, we're hearing somebody's. Just a reminder, we will be recording this webinar, so you can always go back and listen to it later. And since we decided to switch this from a go-to webinar to a go-to meeting, the phone lines are open. We just ask that you mute yourself until the end, and then we will open the floor for questions, and so we can hear from you verbally. And you can also send a chat if you prefer to ask questions that way. Nancy and I will be monitoring those. So with that, I think we have some folks signing on now, so we will get things going. We'll be hearing today from our friends and colleagues, Ed Johnson from NCDOT, George Berger, Active Routes School Coordinator Region 4, and Kristen Brookshire from HSRC about options for funding infrastructure projects in North Carolina and how projects get into the pipeline for consideration. Our speakers will talk about how policies can influence infrastructure and some examples of low-cost infrastructure improvements planned for a few schools here in Wake County. Ed, I will pass things over to you to go first.
All righty.
All right, you should be getting a little message here in a second. There we go. You are all set.
Okay. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. Just going to provide a very high level with some detail overview about how infrastructure gets built and how you as the Active Routes School Coordinator fit into that, as well as talk about some of the supportive items for bicycle and pedestrian transportation, including some policies, some guidelines, and briefly touch on complete streets. So what I hope you'll learn today is how DOT considers and plans for pedestrian and bicycle facilities and its improvement projects from the larger contextual picture to the regional and local picture. Most especially how you, the Active Routes School Coordinator, can make a difference at the level in which you're engaging people. I also want to talk a little bit about the supportive materials regarding DOT policies for design, planning, and cost sharing, as well as to learn a little bit about funding options that communities are using to get projects built, especially those within the RPOs. So as always, you can find out more about these resources and information on the NCDOT Bike Ped Division website. So let's talk about the big picture as it relates to project considerations and planning, and more especially, how do I, as an Active Routes Coordinator, fit into making a difference for the built environment and the infrastructure. This graphic has a lot of information to unpack with it, so let's take a look at it. Each municipality, county, or town approaches planning on a multi-year method. Project consideration is always done in response to a plan, and this is done through, as you can see on the graphic, perhaps through a 30-year long-range plan, what's better known as a comprehensive transportation plan, or perhaps a planning grant, or local bicycle and pedestrian master plan, or even corridor studies, moving to a perhaps a 20 to 25-year plan with a municipal transportation plan, and then moving further into the pipeline on a 10-year level where projects are considered for placement on the State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. And then from that are also considered in part of the prioritization process, better known as SPOT. And this is where once they are selected for SPOT, we start to talk to the municipality about design, right-of-way allocation, and construction and cost estimations. So the questions for you all to ask and perhaps seek answers are, how do we build a system that is most responsive to the planned development pattern and the needs of the community? And then what should we submit? What should the municipality submit to regional and state agencies for design inputs and project considerations? So you really start to see that the path for planning and project consideration starts a long way out. So what is it, this good thing called a comprehensive transportation plan? Excuse me. A CTP is a plan that has been mutually adopted by the local municipality, the MPO, or perhaps the county and the DOT. And there's a lot to the process and the accompanying documentation that goes into a CTP. But it's important to note that each municipality not located within an MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization, has to develop a CTP plan, and the CTP cannot be adopted or updated until the community has an approved local land use plan. So the point here is planning, planning, planning. So let's talk a little bit about the SPOT process and project funding. Since 2013, the NCDOT has been working successfully with the new Strategic Transportation Investments Law, or STI. And this law carries an impact on the process for submitting and scoring projects, bicycle and pedestrian projects in particular. And as a part of the upcoming scoring process for SPOT 5.0, where projects are considered for funding, the prioritization office is responsible for coordinating various project processes and project development for all modes of transportation. So after receiving input from the local level, from the MPOs, or municipal planning organizations, and the RPOs, or rural planning organization offices, they will submit projects for consideration to the NCDOT divisions for scoring. And this process happens every 2 years. And as a result of the continuing to transition into this transportation law, it becomes important that each of the inquiring municipalities work with the NCDOT division office, their RPO, their MPO offices, to develop a list of transportation priorities, especially with sidewalks and pedestrian facilities included. The proposed project needs to score well on the criteria list for bicycle and pedestrian projects. And the other aspect important for you all is to understand is that each NCDOT division has a staff member that can aid in navigating this prioritization process. So let's look a little bit at the scoring process and what goes into that. The new STI SPOT, or Strategic Prioritization of Transportation process, enables MPOs and RPOs to submit bike ped projects to compete for federal funds. These projects also compete against all other modes in their respective division. That is important to note. As a part of the SPOT 3.0 process, 70 bike ped projects out of 470 that were submitted were programmed for funding, totaling about $50 million in federal money. The SPOT 4.0 projects are about to be released. So it's important to distinguish between the independent bike ped project and a possible bike ped accommodation as part of a roadway improvement project being made for motor vehicles. You can see from this slide the scoring considerations for project consideration and acceptance. Safety certainly being the highest, then access, demand and density, connectivity, and then cost effectiveness. So moving from the larger picture, moving in concert with a 30-year plan, a long-range plan, a 20 or 25-year plan or even a 10-year plan, and then eventually moving into the STIP and SPOT process. Let's also talk about the policies and accommodations that are working to support bicycle and pedestrian travel for our state. There are a variety of policies adopted by NCDOT which govern how and when bicycle and pedestrian facilities are incorporated into DOT projects and on DOT roadways and highways. This slide provides a basic information, and I want to go into more into depth on the following slides for each one of these. Established in 1993 and updated in 2001, the pedestrian policy governs the addition of sidewalks to DOT roadway and highway projects at the request of the local government. Again, at the request of the local government. It spells out who will own and maintain the sidewalk, basically the municipality, what cross-section will be used, and at the standard and what will be considered as an upgrade subject to additional local government costs, and how the costs will be shared. This is important for you all as you're developing these discussions and looking at infrastructure upgrades and projects. The text of the pedestrian policy says that in the planning, design, and construction of TIP transportation projects, the DOT will consider the needs of pedestrians and will not create hazards to pedestrian movement. This is meant to allow cities the flexibility to add pedestrian facilities either as a part of the project or in the future. The policy says that the locality must notify DOT that a sidewalk is wanted and is responsible for evaluating need, public involvement, maintenance, and liability. The berm of the right-of-way of the roadway project is a defined width within the project right-of-way. The project berm width is at the outer edge of the project construction limit, for example, just outside the curb and gutter. And in this area, the standard berm width, or project section, is a 10-foot width that accommodates a 5-foot sidewalk. If a sidewalk can't be accommodated within the project berm width, then the municipality is responsible for obtaining additional right-of-way or easement and the utility relocation of that width. Cost sharing is based on the municipal population, and that's why it's important, because North Carolina is such a rural state. So here's some other highlights of the pedestrian policy. Generally, what seems fairly predictable is that you'll get a 5-foot sidewalk with the policy. This is because the limitations that the standard of AASHTO cross-section includes a 5-foot sidewalk. A sidewalk also has to fit within the berm width, so a side path, a multi-use trail, or a greenway is not likely to fit within the project berm width, and a wider or more decorated sidewalk will not be funded by DOT. So in areas where any of those features are desired, the municipality must pick up the additional cost. However, for bridges, you'll see that DOT will fund sidewalks on both sides of the bridge that is shorter than 200 feet, and will consider sidewalks on both sides for longer bridges. Also, DOT will pay for all of the cost of replacing an existing sidewalk if it is removed in order to build a project. So let's look at the bridge policy. It tells us whether sidewalks and bicycle facilities will be included on NCDOT bridges. Sidewalks shall be included in the bridge, has a curb and gutter approach on the roadways leading up to it, as long as the roadways are not controlled access facilities. The pedestrian policy determines whether one or both sides will receive sidewalks. The bridge policy references the pedestrian policy to establish the cost share provisions between DOT and the local government. In other words, the locality must pay for any betterments such as an extra width or paving treatments. The pedestrian policy tells the reason why sidewalks should be considered on bridges, and it's because it's a 50-year decision. Greenways, also called shared use paths or multi-use paths, are an off-road facility for pedestrians and bicyclists to provide more protected environment. So 1994, DOT took an administrative action requiring its staff to consider the incorporation of greenways and crossings during the planning process for highway facilities. In 2015, DOT established a research and decision-making process that staff use to determine if a greenway can be accommodated in a highway project. In this process, BikePed staff will conduct a thorough investigation of the planned greenway facility, which will be impacted by the roadway project. Scoping responses for state, regional, and local bicycle pedestrian plans. This is where the comprehensive transportation plan comes into play. We'll also do a remote site visit, maybe via Google Maps or Street View satellite. We'll also look at other DOT resources for community characteristic reports, community impact assessments, but we seek a complete facility description to understand local and regional connections. We'll contact the local agency to determine where is the project on the agency's priority list and is funding anticipated. Next, DOT staff in the planning and environmental design will evaluate if a greenway accommodation will result in unacceptable impacts from engineering perspective. They'll determine what accommodation will need to be made, such as making the bridge longer or taller. We'll work with the local government to come to an agreement on cost share and maintenance, and following the cost share protocol in the guidelines. If the project team recommends that an accommodation should not be made, then upper management team is notified and they make the final determination. So another policy that's been in place to reinforce getting things built for bicycle and pedestrian travel is the Complete Streets policy. Adopted in 2009, the Complete Streets policy directs NCDOT to consider and incorporate all modes when building new projects or making improvements to existing infrastructure. In 2012, the Complete Streets Planning and Design Guidelines were produced by our division. This was to provide further detail and assistance to DOT and local agency staff working to implement Complete Streets. So you can refer to these documents online and then the web links on the slide. But I would like to show you what these would look like when you're talking to others about planning and designing, especially as it relates to the active routes to school and travel demand in these communities in which you're serving. The guidelines give illustrated cross-sections. These cross-sections show the details of complete streets. They give details for different contexts. So let's look at a couple of examples. This slide shows the detail for the context of an urban or suburban main street. For the first diagram, shows plan view, shows the sidewalk zones. The right side of the diagram, one shows a 6-foot bike lane. The left side shows shared lane markings. The width for each of these elements is provided. And the middle panel describes the key elements in the detail and shows how the cross-section looks in street view. The last panel on the right gives the definitions and functions for each of the zones. Sidewalk zone, the street side zone, the curbside parking lane, the bike zone, and the travel way for motor vehicles. And here's the cross-section with the dimensions for each zone. Sometimes you get variations from the cross-section, such as an angled parking or shared lanes versus bike lanes. But the diagram gives details about the variations, and it's adaptable to different main street situations. Again, this is just an example of what's in the Complete Streets guidelines. Intersection treatments are very important to bike and pedestrian networks. The network of linear facilities doesn't mean much if the crossings and connections aren't right. So the Complete Streets Planning and Design Guidelines go into great detail for intersections as well. This diagram shows the street zones arranged around the intersections of a main street with side streets. It explains the function of the crosswalks and how they can be combined with bulb outs to shorten crossing distances and reclaim space from the street for better utilization. So from this graphic, you can start to understand from a multi-layered approach for multimodal transportation considerations as well as funding opportunities and where the responsibility lies. Sometimes it's with the NCDOT. Other times it might lie with the municipality or with the business owner or even the business district. And questions for you all to ask are, perhaps, are there special assessment districts? Are there public-private partnership opportunities for funding? Are there dual benefit areas for both efficient movement of goods and services as well as for people? And what is the economic benefit of that area that you're trying to help find help for? So transitioning into the PBIN, which is the Pedestrian and Bicycle Infrastructure Network. We've talked about large scale and planning. We've talked about infrastructure. This is important for you all to know that we have a existing geodatabase that shows bicycle and pedestrian facilities by type throughout North Carolina. And this is critical for implementation of complete streets, including accommodating future greenways, under and on bridges, as well as other infrastructure components. This is also critical as we move towards promoting an existing greenway and trail systems and sidewalks. So we're asking, as you all are having these discussions, to please encourage the folks that you're talking to contribute to the PBIN. You can go to the web link on the bottom of the page and find out more information about that. It's also important to use the right language and be consistent with that terminology. Within the PBIN is a glossary. This will aid in our quest for sustainability for our program. And if you're talking with a municipality or a school or community advocate, the language in which you use is critical, and it's especially important to be consistent. And the PBIN helps you all with that as it relates to the built environment. The bicycle and pedestrian crash data. This is important, and this is a tool that helps in the justification and the defensibility of the proposed infrastructure project. You can look up the crash severity and the fatalities in the proposed area and start to develop your toolbox as it relates to your infrastructure request. Crash data is critical to the consideration for planning bike-ped networks as well as for the funding prioritization process. Bike-ped crash data is also coded and geolocated to specific coordinates, and we have the information stemming from 2007 through 2014. Cost is also a big factor, and I think Kristen's going to speak about this a little bit later as well. And there are several tools to develop costs for infrastructure facilities, and this is just one. This tool helps consider what goes into infrastructure project with the design, the right-of-ways, the utilities, the structures, the division charges, as well as other considerations, being length of the facility, type of facility, etc. So as you're moving from your plans in the built environment, again, consistency becomes important, and we in the division have developed a template for our bicycle and pedestrian plans. And they're available so that counties, towns, and municipalities can have the same similar language and hopefully understanding towards non-infrastructure and infrastructure planning and requests. I encourage you all to take a look at that template and look at the content standards. So now you're saying, that's great, Ed, but how am I going to fund this, Ed? And I'm sure there's lots of first name calling out there. But RPOs established by state law and MPOs established by federal law, there are lots of funding opportunities within the MPOs that are using to construct bicycle and pedestrian improvements that are not available to RPOs. What options are available to communities and RPOs to fund and build pedestrian and bicycle projects? We did an implementation survey that was conducted by our division, and it showed that 67% of small rural communities are funding projects in full or part with municipal funds, general fund revenues, capital budget or capital reserves, or even revenues from bond sales. And 48% of communities were using municipal funds in conjunction with other funding sources, public-private partnerships, or even finding matching funds or donations. competition for small construction funds is high, and a single project is likely to exhaust a division's annual allocation. And since the enactment of House Bill 817 in 2013, DOT funds have been prohibited for standalone or independent pedestrian and bicycle facilities. However, this is the key point. State funds can still be used on bike and pedestrian needs when they are a part of an eligible transportation project. When they are a part of that eligible transportation project. So it's important to get it incorporated into another project. So what I want to end with is this table. This is a lot of information. This table indicates potential eligibility for pedestrian and bicycle projects under US DOT for surface transportation funding programs. There is a lot of information. There's a web link at the bottom. Again, this is more for your review when you come back and hear the webinar again and perhaps dive into this a little bit deeper. But it does delineate the activity or the project type, and then by dollar sign you can correlate where that funding potential may be. So this was a lot of information to unpack in a very short time frame. And I encourage you all to look at the slides and listen again to the webinar, but most especially to reach out and ask questions for follow-up. This was a statewide perspective, and I think George and Kristen are going to talk to you a little bit more about the Active Routes point of view and continue with local perspectives. Thank you all for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And I think, we had a question in the chat box that was answered, but I think folks will probably have a few more questions, and we'll hold those until the end and then open the phone line. So hold tight, everybody. George, I'm going to pass over the screen to you so you'll see a request come up in just a second.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yep, it looks great.
All right, great. So thanks again to everybody for allowing me to say a few words about the Active Routes to School coordinator perspective. I'm going to highlight some of the ways that I guess all of us as arts coordinators can work within a policy context to affect and influence and really help other groups and decision makers do the work, the real work of planning, designing, and funding infrastructure programming and projects. Because as we know full well, our program is a non-infrastructure one. So from our perspective, most of what we do is going to be from the perspective of, oops, I think I went too, there we go, is going to be from the perspective of championing or influencing or facilitating what's going on that is really taking place outside of our control and influence. So first off, I'd like to focus basically come at it from the opposite direction that Ed started with. He started with the biggest picture and worked his way down to the middle. I'm going to start from the lowest level, the boots on the ground perspective that we work with so often at the school level, and work my way up. So from school level policies, essentially our work with schools and districts has or certainly can have a direct influence on infrastructure around or in the community adjacent to the schools. Both at the small school district level and the super big or huge school district level, we can really make an impact. So a couple of examples here. Kannapolis, which is, of course, as most of the other coordinators know, is my home base here with the Cabarrus Health Alliance. And we've worked with the Kannapolis City School District, a very small school district, straddling 2 counties and only having 9 schools total. We've worked with them to have them build, develop, and then adopt an open use policy so that each of the elementary level schools can allow the public to use their playgrounds free of charge and whenever school's not in session. And at the same time, we've developed Safe Routes to School plans as part of a CDC-funded REACH grant for 5 out of the 6 elementary level grade schools that both in context and in concert, we've been able to work with the school district and the city and NCDOT's divisions 9 and 10 to work on context issues and context-sensitive infrastructure projects. So not only is the city in the process of working out a new sidewalk prioritization policy that centers around schools, but also NCDOT Division 9 is in the beginning stages of working on a CMAQ project, which is going to help provide some sidewalk and crosswalk projects for one of the schools. If you look at the map that's on the lower right of the screen, one of the things we've really tried to work on is to provide the context to both the city and the school district that if you were to take a prioritization for sidewalks around each of their elementary schools, which you can see in the red with the yellow highlighting around the text, and go out a mile from each school, essentially you start overlapping those circles. So if the city's public works department, through their funding of their locally provided infrastructure, as well as working with the 2 NCDOT divisions, actually start doing sidewalk improvements at each school, eventually the community is going to benefit in total because all of the improvements are going to eventually touch each other. So in a large school district, sometimes the policies that eventually would get down to working their way into influencing infrastructures, this may be bad. It looks like my power might be going out. But anyway, in a large school district, we may end up being able to provide for an open use policy for 170 schools, as well as get active transportation provided for in the student wellness policy, so that basically similar things will happen with regard to what CMS does in its work with Division 10 and CDOT, the Charlotte Department of Transportation. So at the next level, the local level, we can provide recommendations for infrastructure improvements and kind of take them forward to the cities and towns, and sometimes that's going to involve locally built infrastructure. If a town like Cornelius or a town like Cramerton does a bicycle plan that NCDOT has approved, then the town, as Ed mentioned, will be providing some infrastructure just with general funds and that sort of thing, but also the towns make recommendations to their transportation planning organization, their MPO or their RPO, and things will get done that way. It takes probably longer to do the MPO, RPO based programming, but those projects are usually bigger, so we should expect to see them take longer.
Copy of George's slide. Yeah. Hey, George. Yeah, I guess he was logged in through his laptop, so he can't hear us.
So let's give George a minute to reach back out to us, and then we can show his slides while he presents. So maybe we go ahead and ask Kristen.
Yeah, that sounds good. Kristen, are you able to go now?
We're just going to do a little switching around here, gang, and fingers crossed that George will call us, because we can show his slides while he does the rest of his presentation. So instead, we're going to be turning it over to our third speaker for now, Kristen Brookshire. This is Nancy, by the way, gang. Hello. But Kristen, before you start, I did want to introduce you a little bit, because unlike our first 2 speakers, besides Jennifer Delcourt, well, and I think you talked to George, well, obviously you know George, but other coordinators may not know Kristen and her work. Kristen's primary role is as a research associate here at the Highway Safety Research Center, and she spends most of her time with the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center. So her work very much focuses on pedestrian and bicycle safety, and her background is in planning. The reason why we thought her knowledge was particularly relevant and helpful for you to hear from today is because she has really been taking the lead for HSRC on the work that we're doing with the Wake Safe Routes to School project. And so she has been working with 5 different schools in Wake County over the last couple of years. And so she's going to talk to you more specifically about some of the things that she's learned through that. So Kristen, thank you very much for joining us today. And are we ready to turn it to her?
Yes, Kristen, I want to make sure your audio is working.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Oh, thanks for that intro, Nancy. That was a lot more. I was just going to start talking. So the Wake County Model Safe Routes to School program, this is an effort that's funded by the John Rex Endowment, which they're focused on improving childhood outcomes in Wake County, and part of that is includes a focus on injury prevention and healthy living. So this project, we're about 2.5 years into a 4-year project, and there's 2 main parts that are churning concurrently. So the first part is working really closely with 5 partner schools to implement Safe Routes to School programs and, pull out what's working and what's not working in these 5 really different school settings so that we can share those lessons with the 170 plus other schools in the county. And while that's going on with the 5 schools, we're also looking at municipal and school policies for opportunities to improve safety for all users, but specifically child pedestrians. And you'll see the logos of some of the partners on the bottom, and Active Routes to School is on there. And I have to give a huge shout out to Jen, because most days I don't know how I would do this project without her help, and I'm sure we've both learned along the way over the last 2 years. So thank you, Jen. And Jen can probably chime in if she wants to add any examples on some of these. So I'll be spending most of my time talking today about specific infrastructure elements, and so I'll be talking about what we're doing at the 5 schools. And infrastructure projects can achieve, many of them achieve multiple goals at the same time, but around schools, we're generally talking about reducing the speed of vehicles, improving access and mobility, separating the modes of travel, improving visibility, especially for children walking, so that cars and buses can see the kids walking, and then reducing crossing distance. And not that you're going to approach an engineer and say we need to install X, Y, and Z, but the next couple slides are going to be about the, some of the tools that are in the toolkit when it comes to infrastructure improvements. So starting with signs, signals, and markings, if you've ever heard an engineer mention the MUTCD, that's the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and that's where all of these treatments live. So anything from pavement markings, like crosswalks and school zone markings, to the suite of signs that you see in the middle, to other installations like rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are like crossing signs on steroids, where the pedestrian is going to press a button so that it instigates the flashing signal that stays on for the estimated crossing time that someone needs to cross that street. And then there's the pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is actually a traffic control device, so cars have to stop when they see the double red signal. And just this slide is just to show the level of thought that many municipalities are putting into figuring out where they're going to place signs and markings on a street. And a diagram like this might be the result of a policy that a municipality has that specifies where they want certain signs and pavement markings placed, because as you could see on the previous slide, there's a lot of options, and you don't want to put up everything, because then you have sign clutter and people ignoring the signs. And so you certainly don't have to study this diagram. And then in addition to signs and markings, you have the projects that actually take some concrete. So Ed showed some of these in the Complete Streets Design Guide, but curb extensions, which reduce the crossing distance, refuge islands, which gives people a place to stop in the middle if they can't finish the crossing, traffic calming like speed humps or raised crosswalks, and then changes to corners. A tighter corner is going to make cars slow down, while they're making their turn, instead of a big sweeping 30 or 40 mile an hour turn into a parking lot or or onto the next street. So one resource I wanted to point out, and again, you're also not going to be responsible for estimating the cost of projects, but sometimes it's helpful to have a ballpark, as you're starting some of these conversations. And so this cost paper was put together by PBIC in 2013, and it's still pretty up to date. All the treatments. Here's a snapshot of the entry for raised crossings. So there's averages, minimums, maximums for every crosswalks, curb ramps, speed humps, shared use paths. So if you need some background info on cost, I would suggest checking out this resource. So jumping back to the process at the 5 schools, the grant funded the development of a Safe Routes to School action plan at each school, and we worked with Alta Planning and Design on that. And so each plan contains background information, a look at the municipal plans, so understanding what might already be in the works, what the town has already identified as infrastructure needs around a school, documentation of the school layout and traffic circulation, the existing conditions around the school, and then we also included, all the schools did the parent survey and travel tally, so we have that data in there, an infrastructure glossary, and then priority infrastructure recommendations based on the review of plans and the existing conditions around the school, and then a programs toolkit for education and encouragement programs, and a suggested route map. So here's the recommendations map for Northwoods Elementary in Cary. There's further description throughout the plan for the 5 projects in green, but the one I circled in purple is the project that the low-cost infrastructure improvement that the school identified as a priority and that could be funded within the grant funding. And so this is what it looked like out there before. Almost all of the walkers come from the school is up here, and they come down across the greenway and cross this 25 mile an hour residential street. But there was a lot of problems with vehicle speed, cars double parking, blocking the crosswalk, dropping off or picking up anywhere in the road. So here's the concept that we included in the plan. This one was interesting because there was a recommendation for an interim improvement and then a permanent improvement. The permanent improvement involves curb and gutter and landscaping and wouldn't fit within the pilot funds, but it's documented if the town of Cary and the school ever decide that that's needed. So here is some of the construction happening. So this project included ADA compliant curb ramps. There's two new curb ramps, the high visibility crosswalk, the curb extension, which is marked out in paint and flexible delineator posts, and then a new center line, yellow center line, no parking signs, and new crossing signs. And these are the after pictures, which are from this morning. Jen and I were actually out there for their ribbon cutting, which was a fun way to celebrate the project. The principal and the parent who led the Safe Routes to School task force cut the ribbon, and students got to use the crosswalk. And yeah, sorry, these pictures are actually kind of low res. They're straight from the cell phone. So I'm going to go through the rest of the schools. Hodge Road Elementary in Knightdale. This is the concept that's included in the plan. The idea is for this crosswalk to be installed as part of the regular repaving schedule for the town. And I think the conversation now is for that decorative element to be on the outside of the white bars. But those paw prints, which are the school mascot, will continue on to the school property along the sidewalk. And, you know, as long as there's a certain amount of white in the crosswalk, the town was comfortable with it. And looking into the decorative markings was interesting. They're kind of applied like stickers, and you stamp them down with heat, just like you would stamp down the markings for the crosswalk. And hopefully we'll be able to buy extras for the town. It's a really durable material, but cars will be driving over it, and it will last a lot longer than stencil and paint. But it was also cheaper the more you buy. So if we buy 20, I think it was around $2,000, where if you buy 4 or 5, each marking was like, I'd say it was the difference between each marking being like $150 or $250. But this one, we don't have a final design for this one. The town's repaving schedule has kind of been shifted around a lot. But I'm hopeful for this next school year. Here is the engineering design that the town of Raleigh did based on our concept for Bug Elementary. This is another curb extension project where the goal is to improve visibility and reduce crossing distance for students, but it's also to prevent these U-turns that parents were doing. You're actually supposed to come, if you want to go into the drop-off line, you need to drive down Little John and up Cooper Road, but some parents were coming down here and flipping a U-ey, but with the curb extension, that would no longer be possible. And the city's also considering an always stop right now, but that's not shown on this diagram. And Ligon is the only middle school we're working with. It's also in Raleigh, and Raleigh did the engineering design for this project. It'll involve multiple ADA compliant crosswalks, and then a curb extension in concrete that will narrow the lane here, so bringing pedestrians out further and preventing cars from dropping off on the curb right there. And this is another place where the city's considering an always stop. And when I was talking with the PTA at this school in February, one of the parents had an idea to do a pop-up project to kind of mock it up and show the neighborhood and the school community what this would look like. And the idea was for it to be on the same day as the health fair and 5K at the school. And so I went to the city of Raleigh, and you know, I think they had been approached by other places that wanted to do a pop-up, you know, demonstration, and so they're talking about what their policy is going to be for this. But I'm hoping that we can do something in the fall. But the question is whether it's going to be, you know, a one-day true demonstration project where it's using like masking tape and tires and cones, or if it's going to be more of a pilot project where the town of Raleigh is actually testing out the design, you know, for a week or 2 weeks before they make a final decision. So I am certainly not an expert on tactical urbanism, but I just wanted to bring this up because I'd say that the project at Northwoods, where we had the ribbon cutting this morning, that really does fall within as an interim project, something that you would have in place for like 1 or 2 up to 5 years. So the permanent version of that project would be curb and gutter and landscaping, but the town could just keep maintaining the pavement markings and putting in new flex posts as needed. So I'm hoping to bring this up at a couple of the other schools too, and so I just wanted to put up a few resources. I can't share any lessons learned yet, but it's a conversation we're having, and I I don't know if that's something that's come up for you all, because you can test out a design, or you can just raise community awareness and excitement for a project at a school. So it could be a cool tool. And that's all I have. I'm sorry is George back on the line?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, sorry, we're actually getting close to 2.
Well, the webinar goes till 2:15, so we're perfect.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
And I wanted to apologize also again for my computer running out of battery life and just dying on me. So sorry about that.
We're glad you're back and all juiced up. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I think, we're saving questions till the end.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Yes,
George, I'm going to pass things back to you.
Okay.
This work. It says it's waiting to view your screen.
I've got the circling blue little bubble thing. It says it's not responding for some reason.
You just
Okay. George, do you mind? I'll try this again, but it might be easier if you send me your slides. I have your old slides, but not your updated.
I will send them right now.
So maybe we should pause and take any questions that you might have for thus far for either Kristen or for Ed. Oh, do you need to unmute people? Colleen, is everybody unmuted? Okay.
Okay. Hold on.
Is that information overload?
Everybody's so quiet. Can you scroll the chat up just in case there's something in there that I can't see? Okay. All right. Okay.
I have one more cost example to share, actually. So I didn't mention, through the grant, the amount for each school to implement their project is $16,000, and I haven't seen cost estimates yet for the 2 schools in Raleigh, but given the fact that they each have at least 3 curb ramps, I think the town is aware that that'll put them outside the $16,000, and that's something that they're willing to cover because they want those to be accessible curb ramps. And the Cary project, where we had the ribbon cutting this morning, came in at about $20,000, and I think the majority of that was the curb ramps. So the curb extension, all of the signage and pavement marking work, that's the really low cost part of it. But they did put in 2 beautiful curb ramps.
Yeah, that is cool. Thank you for pointing that out, Kristen. And I apologize if you mentioned this during your presentation, but the roads where the improvements are happening, who owns those roads?
They're all town-owned roads. At the beginning of the project, we didn't know if it was going to work out that way. But for these 5 schools, the projects that were identified happened to be on town-owned roads. But NCDOT, the division engineer, was part of the review for the primary recommendations. So like the 5 primary projects and the recommendations map. Also planning, and sometimes I was there to talk with NCDOT about the recommendations.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Hey, you guys, for some strange reason, neither my browser nor Outlook are responding, and I think it had something to do with the unfortunate automatic shutdown of my computer. So I think I'm sort of dead in the water, at least for the moment. I can't send anything out, and I can't get anything to work coming in either. It was a wonderful presentation that I had prepared. The best ever.
Well, George, is there a way for you personally to see them?
I can't even
about your
see
main
them
points?
now. I can, yeah, actually I can, come to think of it. I can do that. So, okay, if you would like me to, I'll talk through them really quickly, and then you'll see them as the webinar or what's left of my part is archived. Will that work for you?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. So then quickly, we had talked about school level policy and planning and discussions leading into local level recommendations. And I was focusing on two bicycle plans, one from the town of Cornelius and the other from the town of Cramerton, that are both, well, the Cornelius one was done in 2015. And we built a Safe Routes to School plan, a non-infrastructure plan, into that bicycle plan. So when it was adopted by the Town Board of Commissioners, the town was going to take on the role of planning and building some of the infrastructure that was related to what was in their bicycle plan, but it just happened to parallel a lot of the Safe Routes to School recommendations as well. Further, they were going to make additional recommendations to CARTPO, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, for funding of higher dollar cost infrastructure projects and so on. Town of Cramerton in Gaston County, their bicycle plan is currently underway. They've just started it. It was a NCDOT Division 12 oriented project, but came out of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Planning Grant Initiative out of the division, the Bike Ped Division. And they are looking to other partners. So they will have some town constructed infrastructure, basically oriented toward revitalization of their downtown, economic development through cycling of their downtown, and a renewed safety focus. But they're going to be working with NCDOT Division 12, the Division Traffic Engineer, the Gaston Cleveland Lincoln MPO for additional recommendations, and they've been working with other partners that we shouldn't overlook. The Health Department, Gaston County Health Department, the school districts, there's actually two that they work in, and then other partners that are sort of non-traditional, but that we as arts coordinators might have the opportunity to already have a network with or work with. In this case, the Carolina Thread Trail, which is a 14-county initiative to provide greenways, bikeways, and blueways across basically the Catawba River Basin. So they're working together on things there. Then the next level up, again, starting with the most local level, the school and school district, and working our way up to the state, is the MPO, RPO level, where, as Ed pointed out, they do a lot of the planning for infrastructure improvements, but they also advise and work toward getting the funding in place for it. And one MPO that I wanted to point out, again, it's in Gaston County, but it's a 3-county MPO, Gaston, Cleveland, and Lincoln counties. One of the things that a lot of us are doing as Active Routes to School coordinators is we're slipping our, as Ed would like to say, putting our noses under the tents wherever we can find a place to do so. And so it just so happens that they were starting a new bicycle pedestrian advisory committee and invited me to participate on it. And in my first meeting, just by chance, they happened to be reviewing the criteria for ranking for their bicycle pedestrian projects that were going to be going into their metropolitan transportation plan. So that very first meeting that I'd ever sat in on this particular MPO's BPAC, I got to add some Safe Routes to School language into the ranking criteria that's going to affect projects going forward into the next 20 or 30 years. So this particular MPO has been pretty successful in getting bike ped projects, and a lot of them happen to be just up until this point by coincidence near schools in the 3 counties. They have over 90 bicycle and pedestrian projects in their current MPO, and they have no reason to think that they're going to slow that down. So there may be MPOs and RPOs that you are working with that either are doing a lot of bicycle pedestrian planning that you may not be really aligned with yet, and so there's an opportunity to just ask the question about what they're doing, what their interests are, or if you're lucky, you would have an MPO or an RPO that is doing things that may not necessarily directly relate to schools, but you can convince them to add criteria that reflect safe routes to school strategies and kind of work their way into the system that way. Then, excuse me, then the next level is at the state level. And this is where I don't think that we as active routes to school coordinators have as much direct influence, but in a lot of cases we'll be working with or are working with people who would be making design level decisions or using general statutes to influence the design and construction of infrastructure. So 2 examples here. Another town in Gaston County, this time the far west corner of Gaston County, there's a town called Cherryville there. They have a middle school that it just so happens that this particular past Bike to School Day, one of the Gaston County Health and Human Services staffers was attending that event and let me know after the fact that they had a lot of congestion around the school for drop-off, a lot of confusion about where kids should be crossing the street and how they could do it safely, that sort of thing, even on Bike to School Day. So we put together a meeting just with the school principal, the NCDOT Division 12 district planner or district engineer, and the local police chief and a police sergeant to start looking at what we could do related to fixing some of the problems. Again, it's infrastructure related, but it's not necessarily physical infrastructure. So the general statutes in North Carolina pertain to things like standing and stopping, so illegal dropping off and picking up of students, speed zone enforcement. There isn't a school zone time set of time signs like 3:30 to 4:30 is when the school zone is in effect for the dismissal period, and so the police department didn't think they had the ability to enforce speeding during that time because there was no signage, and there was a crosswalk that was being used by a lot of kids to get to and from school, but it wasn't a very effective crosswalk, and so we convened this meeting just to work on issues that were related to the most local stuff, basically, but that really takes into consideration state general statutes and design. So hopefully before the beginning of the next school year, we're going to be able to make some changes, and the school principal has already agreed that he's going to be providing written documentation to parents in the welcome packet so that any new changes are put into place by Cherryville PD, NCDOT, and the school, so hopefully it'll be much more effective and well regulated from the beginning of the next school year. Finally, at the state level, there are, and this is really, again, it's design guidance and general statutes. Don't forget to look at your individual schools, well, individual school districts to see if they have a school zone committee. So in a lot of cases, particularly the larger towns and larger cities, a school district and a local jurisdiction, whether it's a city as large as Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Asheville, Wilmington, they might have one where the city's Department of Transportation works together with the schools and the district transportation folks to take a look at issues related to school crossings, speed zones, actual school zones, whether you need to have those expanded and whatnot. And so they work together mostly on a case-by-case basis, but they're using local tools, but with state statutes and policies in place. So, and then finally, we have a combination, or a lot of things that are in combination, that you have multiple touch points to influence infrastructure. In some ways, the biggest challenge that we have is when you have a school or school community that has a possible project related to infrastructure, say a sidewalk project, but it doesn't go far enough. An example that I was going to use, or am going to use, is in Cleveland County, where a school that was founded in 1876, but it was way out in the country at that point, Now in Boiling Springs, it's getting closer and closer, or actually development is getting closer and closer to it, including a number of low-income neighborhoods. As Ed mentioned, local divisions don't have a lot of local money basically within their division to work with. It runs out pretty quickly, and they're not allowed to use those funds for standalone sidewalk bike ped projects. So Division 12 was using the last remaining funding it had for an old sidewalk projects to be able to construct a sidewalk part of the way from the school to a number of low and moderate income neighborhoods, but it didn't get far enough, and furthermore, it wasn't able to go in any way toward the YMCA, which is about a half a mile away, where a number of the kids, in fact, about a quarter of the school's population, went every day for after-school programming. So what the school is doing and what the town is doing is they're working with Division 12 to do what they can. They're also planning to apply for a North Carolina Division of Natural Resources Park and Recreation Trust Fund to try to see if they can get funds for a greenway, which will then connect the school to the YMCA across a major floodplain and see how that works. So they might end up with a combination type project where the school, the town, the YMCA, the division, the Active Routes to School project or program, and a number of other partners were able to come together and look at things in somewhat of a unique way and skin the cat without doing it, the usual way, because it would have been too expensive and there wasn't enough money or certainly enough time. So in a nutshell, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that if you can network, continue to network, and provide that facilitation between partners, even if they don't necessarily think that they can have an impact, or if their agency or their authority even pertains to something, there are almost always another way to figure out how to get things done. It may take a lot longer than the Active Routes to School program is around, but what you may end up seeing when you come back to it in a few years is a project that you actually had some sort of degree of influence and success in. So in a nutshell and without slides, I apologize again for all of that, but thank you for letting me be a part of the webinar.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, George. You did very well without slides there and just trying to sort of walk us through it. And I really appreciate the note that you ended on about, that sometimes what we'll be able to bring to the table is really around networking and facilitating between partners and taking the long view on that, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not valuable, and in fact can be tremendously valuable. You gave that wonderful example about how you influenced policy that will impact projects moving forward. So that's great, and I want to say thank you to each of the speakers, because I feel like you walked us through a really nice spectrum or sort of range in infrastructure, from sort of the state level, how our projects selected and funded, to what does this look like at a town and an MPO level. And of course, we had some specific examples that related to policy possibilities and also related to having some specific foundation funding that sort of gave a reason to bring people together and partner, and also was able to put in a little bit of money, though, as Kristen pointed out, the town or the city of Raleigh also put in some money, particularly when it came to the ADA accommodations. We're right at 2:15, but I do want to open it up for questions. If folks have another minute to stick around, that would be great. There's been some discussion in the chat, so y'all might want to take a look at that. I'm not going to spend the time now to reiterate that, but is there any questions that folks on the phone would like to ask of our speakers?
This is Jennifer. I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So this is something that I have talked with a couple of you about very briefly, but I am starting to get enough, I guess, name recognition that I'm having parents And sometimes principals kind of approach me out of the blue and say, you know, we want to make this area safer for students walking to school, or we want more students to walk to school, and there's an infrastructure issue, and they're asking me what to do. So the role I've taken is to kind of say, okay, what's the problem, and find out who the right person at the municipality is and help facilitate that conversation. But sometimes it's an improvement on the school campus they're talking about, and either the school district or the town, if it's off campus, is saying, oh, that's not going to work for whatever reason, and there's not really a constructive solution immediately offered. Do you have any suggestions for how we can work with parents and schools to address those kinds of issues? I know it's a loaded question.
And that question is for any of the speakers. Is that right?
Well, this is Lee. I know I didn't speak, but I could chime in from a project we're working on right now. And that there was, so we identified areas off campus as well as on campus, and the superintendent is willing to put the school campus improvements into his budget. So it may be a conversation to help get, you know, how much it would cost, and then have a conversation with the superintendent and the Board of Education if it's something they'd be willing to put into their budget, even if it took a couple years for them to allocate funds for that. It's not the best answer, but I was surprised when he said, I'll pay for that. So one option if you ask.
And I would also chime in to kind of reiterate that in a lot of cases, it seems as though when the Board of Education gets wind of something like that from the advocacy that parents bring to the board, even if, and I hesitate to suggest this, but if parents are in front of the Board of Education saying, we just want our kids to be safe, and the only hang-up is something we have on campus, the superintendent's office or the facilities director or whomever it might be oftentimes finds some funds somewhere to put in that little section of sidewalk. It doesn't always work because, Jan, as you and I have talked about, sometimes it's a routing issue, a routing issue, as much as it is a cost issue. And that's probably more complicated, but you know, oftentimes there's a way to deal with that that might involve a number of different strategies. So it may be a sidewalk, a crosswalk, and the crossing guard or something.
From a DOT perspective, there is the Municipal School Transportation Assistance Program, which can help. Their link is available on the DOT on our BikePed website, or you can just Google NCDOT Municipal School Transportation Assistance. They have a calculator basically that helps the schools to determine the length of queue necessary for the number of students based on student population and area population that can work with on-campus issues for motorized vehicles that are queuing back on right-of-way, but they can also help as a catalyst for a conversation in reducing the number of motorized vehicles and promoting bikers and walkers or mass transportation. And there is a staff member that can help determine some of that information. And they'll do their best to be able to respond.
Yeah. And you know, you and I have obviously talked about this before, and I'm not withholding a genius answer for you on this. But I don't know, I guess I was thinking about George's answer, and I mean, that's probably true that, you know, the more parents are asking for it and probably the higher up they go, that's a short-term solution, but that also presents an equity issue, because if you're thinking about the district as a whole, like where the greatest safety problems are, some of those might be at schools where no one's asking for it yet. And I think that's part of, I mean, I think that's why the policy side of things is really important, so that there's a more of a uniform approach. I mean, new schools are one thing, but going back and fixing some of these schools, that's a whole nother animal too.
Yeah, because some of the issues do seem to come down to school site design, which is why I'm intending to talk to somebody who works in that field soon to ask some of these questions. But I know with Wake County, there is, I think, a small pot of money in the facilities department to do some on-campus improvements. But as big as the school system is, it disappears really quickly. And it would be maybe a possibility to encourage parents to get together and lobby for a larger fund. I don't know how likely that is in this current climate. But I think the other thing, I just get a little bit nervous about the whole lobbying piece and being careful about lobbying myself versus telling parents to go lobby the school board and trying to be careful about that.
Yeah.
Well, gang, I'm feeling like I should probably close things out for the afternoon. I really appreciate some of these good questions and the discussion, both over the phone as well as on the chat, and I appreciate your flexibility as we got everybody on the right presentation platform, and we got George back, and we just had a little bit of everything in the last bit. But I think there's been some really helpful orientation and detailed info and ideas. So I hope each of you took away some things that you're able to act on. And that's it. Have a wonderful afternoon. Oh, and Colleen did record this, and she'll be sending out a note when it's archived.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.